I sat down, my hand trembling as I moved the mouse. His email was open. The inbox was mostly junk mail, work memos. But then I saw the sent folder and a chain of emails with a subject line that made my blood run cold: Our Future. The recipient was Sarah Jenkins. I clicked it open, and my world ended. Not with a bang, but with the quiet, devastating clarity of black words on a white screen. It wasn't just a few flirtatious messages, it was a full-blown affair. Months of it. Emails detailing their secret lunches, their weekend trips, his business trips. Plans. They were making plans. Plans for after he left me. Plans for how they would run the department together once she had the SVP title and I was, in their words, managed out. There it was. A line Mark had written just last week. Don't worry about Elena. Once she gets the promotion, she'll be so demoralized she'll either quit or we'll find a way to push her out. She won't see it coming. She trusts us both completely. I felt nothing. It was a strange, hollow emptiness, as if my soul had been scooped out, leaving just a shell. I scrolled through the messages, one after another, each one a fresh stab in the heart. Pictures. There were pictures. Mark and Sarah, laughing on a beach I'd never been to, his arm around her, kissing her in a hotel room that looked suspiciously like the one from his conference in Chicago. The conference I couldn't go to because I was working day and night on the very project that had just secured her my promotion. The professional betrayal was a knife in the back, but this was poison in my veins. They hadn't just stolen my job, they had stolen my life, my past, my trust. They had turned my entire reality into a joke, and I was the punchline. The front door opened. I heard his keys hit the bowl by the door. "Elena, babe, I'm home," he called out, his voice filled with fake concern. I didn't move. I just sat there, staring at the screen, the cold blue light illuminating the death of my life. He walked into the office, his smile faltering when he saw my face, when he saw what I was looking at. The color drained from his skin. "Elle, I can explain." That's when the emptiness finally broke and something else flooded in. Something hot and dark and sharp. Rage. A pure, crystalline rage I had never felt before. I stood up slowly, my eyes locked on his. I didn't scream, I didn't cry. I just looked at him, and for the first time I saw him for what he was. A weak, pathetic parasite who had been feeding on my love and my ambition. He started to stammer, spewing pathetic excuses, lies tumbling over one another, but I wasn't listening. I was looking past him, at the reflection in the dark window of the office. I saw a woman I didn't recognize. Her face was a mask of stone, her eyes burning with a cold fire. And in that moment, a voice in my head, a voice that sounded chillingly like my own, whispered a promise. They think they've won. They think they've broken me, but I'm not done yet. Later that night, I stood in the bathroom, staring at my reflection in the mirror. My makeup was gone. My hair was a mess. My eyes were red-rimmed, but dry. I placed my hands on the cold marble counter, leaning in close, my breath fogging the glass. I whispered to my own reflection, the words of venomous vow. They think they've won, but I'm not done yet. Collapse is a quiet thing at first. It isn't a single dramatic explosion. It's a series of small, grinding defeats that wear you down to the bone. The first was the sound of Mark's suitcase rolling across the hardwood floor as he left. He didn't fight. Cowards never do. He just packed his things and scurried away, leaving behind the wreckage of our marriage like a hit-and-run driver. Then came the divorce papers, delivered by a cold-eyed courier, the legal jargon a sterile summary of our shared life, now reduced to assets and liabilities. The collapse at work was even more humiliating. It was a death by 1,000 paper cuts. I was kept on, of course. Firing me would look too suspicious. Instead, I was sidelined, My projects were reassigned. I was left out of key meetings. I became a ghost in the hallways of a place where I was once a queen. People who used to seek out my opinion would now avoid my gaze, their faces a mixture of pity and fear. The whispers followed me everywhere. Into the break room, the elevators, the bathroom stalls. I could feel their eyes on my back, could hear the hushed gossip. Did you hear about Elena? Her husband left her for Sarah Jenkins. Can you imagine? Each whisper was another twist of the knife. Mark and Sarah were brazen. They'd walk into meetings together, a united front, the new power couple. Sarah, in my job, sitting in my chair, presenting my strategies as her own. She'd look at me with a carefully crafted expression of professional concern, a silent, smug dare in her eyes. What are you going to do about it? For a while, the answer was nothing. I did nothing. I went home to an empty house that echoed with memories. The silence was deafening. I drank too much cheap red wine, the kind that leaves a bitter taste in your mouth and a pounding in the head the next morning. I stopped eating, then I'd binge on junk food until I felt sick. I'd stare at the ceiling for hours, replaying every moment, every lie, searching for the sign I must have missed. The self-doubt was a cancer, eating me alive from the inside. Was I not pretty enough? Not smart enough? Not enough? My confidence, the very core of my identity, was shattered into a million pieces. I remember one night sitting on the floor of my walk-in closet, surrounded by the beautiful clothes of a life that was no longer mine. The rain was lashing against the window, a relentless, miserable rhythm. I was holding a stack of bills, the mortgage, the utilities, the credit card statements filled with dinners and hotels I now knew were for them. I was drowning in debt, in sorrow, in shame. And a dark, insidious thought slithered into my mind. Maybe it would be easier to just stop, to just let the waves pull you under. When your entire world burns down overnight, you're left with a choice, a fundamental question that defines who you are. Do you try to rebuild from the ashes, or do you get down on your hands and knees, sift through the embers, and plot your revenge? I was so close to choosing neither. I was close to choosing nothingness. And then I found my father's journal. He passed away 2 years before all this happened. He was an architect, a quiet, methodical man who believed in structure, in foundations. He wasn't a man of many words, but he was a prolific writer. After he died, my mom gave me a box of his things, and in it was a worn, leather-bound journal. I never opened it. The grief was still too raw. But that night, desperate for any kind of anchor, I pulled it from the box. His handwriting was a precise, elegant script. It wasn't a diary of feelings. It was a logbook of his thoughts, his principles. Notes on building design were interspersed with quotes from Stoic philosophers and observations on human nature. And then I found a passage he must have written after a major professional setback of his own. Adversity does not build character, it reveals it. The world will try to break you. People will betray you. Your plans will crumble. This is not a possibility, it is a certainty. The weak will see this as an end. They will surrender to bitterness or despair. The strong understand that this is the moment of forging, the moment the steel is tempered. Do not fight with passion. It burns out too quickly. Do not act with haste. It leads to ruin. Play the long game. Observe. Be patient. Let them think they have won. The greatest strength is not in the initial blow you receive, but in the final, calculated move you make when everyone has forgotten you're still on the board. I read that passage over and over, the words sinking into my soul like rain into dry earth. Let them think they have won. Play the long game. It was as if he was speaking directly to me from across the veil of death. A sudden clarity cut through the fog of my depression. The wine, the self-pity, the sleepless nights, that was what they wanted. My self-destruction was the final victory in their sick little game. By falling apart, I was letting them win. By giving up, I was proving them right. The fire of my rage had cooled into a single, hard point of purpose. I would not self-destruct. I would not quit. I would not be managed out. I would fight back, but not on their terms. Not with loud accusations or tearful confrontations. I would do it my way. Quietly, methodically, playing the long game. I closed the journal, the worn leather cool against my skin. I walked back into the bathroom and looked at my reflection. The woman staring back was still a mess. Her eyes were still hollow, her face pale. But for the first time in months, there was something else there. A flicker in her eyes, not of hope, not yet, but of steel. The forging had begun. They'll never see it coming. My father was an architect. He taught me that before you can build anything, you have to clear the site and lay a foundation. My life was a demolition site, so I started clearing the rubble. The first thing to go was the weakness. I traded wine glasses for weights. The burn in my muscles became a welcome distraction from the ache in my heart. Every morning, before the sun came up, I was at the gym or running along the river, pushing my body to its absolute limit. The physical pain was grounding. It reminded me I was still alive, still capable of feeling something other than despair. With every mile I ran, I was running away from the victim they had tried to make me. Next, I rebuilt my mind. I devoured books on corporate law, finance, forensic accounting. I spent my nights not crying into a pillow, but hunched over legal documents from my divorce, learning the language of my enemy. I studied the company's bylaws, its financial reports, its hierarchy. I became an expert on the very system they were using against me. Knowledge wasn't just power, it was armor. At work, I transformed. I became the ghost they wanted me to be, but a ghost who was always watching, always listening. I was quiet, agreeable, efficient. I did the meaningless tasks they assigned me with a serene smile. I offered no resistance. I showed no anger. To Mark and Sarah, I was a defeated woman, gracefully accepting her fate. My compliance made them comfortable. It made them careless. They'd hold their whiskered conversations near my cubicle, assuming I wasn't listening. They'd leave documents on the printer, assuming I wouldn't look. They'd gossip with their allies, confident I was too broken to matter. But I heard everything. I saw everything. I filed it all away in a mental vault, piece by piece, building a map of their weaknesses, their alliances, their secrets. I also started to cultivate my own unlikely allies, not executives or managers, but the people who are invisible to men like Mark, the IT guys in the basement who saw every email, the executive assistants who scheduled every secret meeting, the cleaning crew who emptied every trash can. I learned their names. I asked about their kids. I brought them coffee. I remembered their birthdays. I treated them with the respect that people like Mark and Sarah, blinded by their own arrogance, never did. I didn't ask them for anything. I just built a network of quiet loyalty, a web of goodwill they would never even know existed. My apartment transformed too. The beautiful, sterile home I'd shared with Mark became my war room. One wall of my home office, once covered in framed photos of a fake happy life, was now a giant corkboard. It was covered in a web of sticky notes, printouts of emails, company org charts, and timelines. Red yarn connected names to dates, transactions to meetings. It was a chaotic masterpiece of obsession, the physical manifestation of my long game. Every night, I'd stand before it, a cup of black coffee in my hand, and I would strategize. There's a question everyone who has ever been wronged must face, a question that defines the limits of their own morality. What would you risk for justice? Your job? Your reputation? Your freedom? What about your soul? How far are you willing to go into the dark to drag your enemies into the light? I was willing to go all the way. The turning point, the real opening, came from the most unexpected of places. It was a casual conversation with David, one of the junior accountants I'd befriended. He was complaining about a new expense reporting system that Sarah had implemented. It was clunky, overly complicated, and, according to him, full of security holes. "It's a mess," he'd said, stirring his coffee. She and Mark pushed it through over everyone's objections. They hired this outside consulting firm, Apex Solutions, to manage it. No one's ever heard of them, and their invoices are insane. Everything is flagged as a miscellaneous consulting fee. It's a black box. Apex Solutions. The name sent a jolt through me. That night, I didn't sleep. I spent hours digging, cross-referencing, pulling out the thread David had handed me. Apex Solutions was a shell corporation, registered to a P.O. box. It had no website, no employees, no history. But it had received over $2 million in consulting fees from our company in the last 6 months. The payments were all authorized by 2 people, Sarah Jenkins, the new SVP, and Mark Vance, the head of sales. And then I found the final piece, the smoking gun. I hacked into our company's vendor payment system, a skill I'd picked up from a late-night YouTube tutorial and a friendly chat with one of the IT guys. I traced the payments from our company to Apex Solutions. And from Apex Solutions, the money was being funneled directly into a private offshore account, an account registered under the name of Mark's deceased grandmother. They weren't just having an affair. They weren't just corporate backstabbers. They were thieves. They were embezzling millions of dollars from the company. And the new system David had complained about, it was designed specifically to hide their tracks. My hands were shaking, but not from fear. It was exhilaration. This was it. This was the weapon I had been searching for. It was bigger than their affair, bigger than my stolen promotion. This was a crime, something they couldn't lie or charm their way out of. I sat in the dark of my war room, the glow of the monitor illuminating the intricate web on the wall. I could go to the CEO. I could lay it all out, but that would be too simple, too clean. They would have lawyers, excuses. They would try to spin it, try to drag me down with them. No. My father's words echoed in my head. Calculated, patient. The final move. I opened a new email. I used a secure, anonymous service, routing my IP address through 3 different countries. The recipient was Arthur Sterling, the chairman of the board. A ruthless, old-school corporate titan who had zero tolerance for theft and incompetence. The subject line was simple. A question about Apex Solutions. The body of the email was just as simple. No accusations, no emotion. Just a single, untraceable document attached. A bank statement from Apex Solutions showing a transfer of $250,000 into their account, followed by a transfer of the exact same amount into the offshore account, both signed off by Mark and Sarah. And 1 line of text. Perhaps you should ask your new SVP where this money is going. My finger hovered over the mouse. This was the point of no return. The moment I pressed this button, the silent war would become very, very loud. I thought about their smiling faces, their whispered conspiracies, their complete and utter disregard for the life they had destroyed. I thought about my father's journal. I thought about the woman in the mirror, the one who had made a promise. I smirked in the dark, a slow, cold smile, and I pressed send. Sending that email was like lighting a fuse on a stick of dynamite and then walking away. You don't know exactly when it will explode, but you know it's going to be spectacular. The explosion started quietly. An emergency, closed-door board meeting was called. An external auditing firm was hired. Whispers of an internal review started to circulate. The atmosphere in the office shifted overnight from gossip to paranoia. And that's when the real show began. I got to watch from my quiet, invisible corner as the 2 people who had destroyed my life began to destroy each other. The bond they had forged in betrayal was no match for the terror of being caught. Their confidence evaporated, replaced with a frantic, clawing fear. I saw Mark pull Sarah into an empty conference room, his voice a harsh, panicked whisper, and his hands gesturing wildly. I saw her storm out minutes later, her face pale with fury. Their secret celebratory lunches turned into tense, accusatory meetings. The loving glances were replaced with narrowed eyes and suspicion. Who made a mistake? Who left a trail? Who was going to take the fall? The beauty of my plan was its simplicity. I had given the board just enough information to start digging, but not enough to point directly to me. I was still the broken, grieving ex-wife, the pitiful, sidelined employee. I played the part to perfection. I would see Sarah in the hallway, her face etched with stress, and I'd offer her a small, sympathetic smile. "You look exhausted, Sarah. Being an SVP must be a lot of pressure. Let me know if there's anything I can do to help." The look of confused rage in her eyes was more satisfying than any screaming match could ever be. I was kind. I was helpful. I was completely and utterly unassuming. Behind every smile, behind every polite offer to grab her coffee, there was a cold, calculated strategy. I was gaslighting my own tormentors, and they were too consumed by their own panic to see it. The auditors descended on the office like a flock of vultures. They were everywhere, in their identical gray suits, poring over documents, interviewing employees, their faces impassive. The finance department was on lockdown. Mark and Sarah were interviewed for hours, separately. They started turning on each other publicly. I overheard Mark telling another executive that the Apex Solutions account was entirely Sarah's initiative. An hour later, I heard Sarah telling her assistant that Mark had handled all the financials on that project. Their web of lies was unraveling, thread by thread. The visuals of their downfall were a private movie I played in my head. I'd picture them at night, in whatever separate, lonely beds they were sleeping in, staring at the ceiling, wondering who had betrayed them. The irony was exquisite. The traitors were now haunted by the ghost of a traitor they couldn't identify. They were shredding documents in their offices late at night. They were having hushed, frantic phone calls in the stairwell. Their perfect world was cracking, and I was the silent earthquake beneath their feet. I knew they suspected me. Of course they did. I was the one with the motive. But they had no proof, and their own arrogance worked against them. They had written me off as weak, as defeated. In their minds, I wasn't capable of something so sophisticated, so ruthless. They were looking for another executive, a rival, someone they considered their equal. They never thought to look down. The turning point, the moment their panic escalated into pure, primal terror, was when they realized they were being set up. They had created the perfect crime, but they had also created the perfect scapegoat, me. My signature was on some of the initial project proposals for the system upgrade from back when I was still leading the team, long before Apex Solutions was ever involved. It was flimsy, but it was something. They could claim that I had set up the fraudulent vendor account and that they had simply been signing off on what they thought were legitimate expenses, approved by their subordinate. It was a desperate, disgusting move, and I knew they were desperate enough to try it. The final cliffhanger didn't come in an email or a shouted accusation. It came as a single, folded piece of paper slipped under my office door when no one was looking. It wasn't in an envelope. It had no name on it, just my own. I unfolded it, my heart rate steady, my hands calm. The message was typed in a generic font. It was just 5 words. We know it was you. It wasn't a question. It was a declaration of war. They were cornered animals now, and they were about to lash out. They were planning to pin the entire fraud on me, to not only take my job and my husband, but to send me to prison for their crimes. They thought it was a threat. They thought it would make me back down, make me afraid. They still didn't understand. I wasn't the woman they had broken anymore. I was the woman who had been forged, and they had just handed me the hammer. I walked over to my desk, picked up my phone, and dialed a number. "Hi, is this Jessica Wu from the Financial Times?" I said. "We spoke once a few years ago. You said if I ever had a real story, I should call you. Well, I have a story that's going to blow the roof off the entire financial sector." The letter was their final move, their gambit. They thought they had me cornered, and in a way, they were right. The next morning, I was summoned to HR. It wasn't a request, it was a demand. The room was cold. The faces across the table were colder. They started with gentle, probing questions, their voices dripping with fake concern. They spoke of irregularities, of accounting discrepancies. They showed me the documents, the ones with my signature from months ago, placed carefully on top of a pile of fraudulent invoices from Apex Solutions. The implication was clear. They were building a case. They were laying the foundation to make me the fall guy. My reputation, my career, my freedom, it was all on the line. Every instinct screamed at me to defend myself, to show them my evidence, to expose Mark and Sarah right there in that sterile room. But I held my tongue. I stuck to the plan. I played the part of the confused, frightened victim. I denied everything, my voice carefully pitched to sound shaky, uncertain. It was the most difficult acting job of my life. Walking out of that room, I felt the walls closing in. The police would be next, an arrest, a trial, the public humiliation. I went home and the mask finally cracked. I walked into my shower, turned the water on as hot as I could stand it, and I slid down the tiled wall until I was sitting on the floor, the water beating down on me. And I broke. The months of control, of discipline, of cold, hard rage, it all dissolved into a gut-wrenching sob. The fear I had been suppressing for so long finally crashed over me in a tidal wave. What if I'd miscalculated? What if their lies were more powerful than my truth? What if I lost? I had gambled everything on this, and the thought of them winning, of them standing free while I was ruined, was a pain worse than the initial betrayal. I was so close to giving up, to just letting it all go and walking away broken. This is the moment every fighter faces, the moment after you've taken the hardest punch. When you're on the mat, the world's spinning, the taste of blood in your mouth. Your body is screaming at you to stay down. Your mind is telling you it's over. In that moment, would you keep fighting, or would you let them count you out? I was trying to learn how to sail, and a sudden squall had capsized my little boat. I was terrified, tangled in the ropes, swallowing water. He dove in and pulled me out, and I remember sitting on the dock, wrapped in a towel, shivering and crying, feeling like a complete failure. He didn't coddle me, he just sat beside me and said something I never forgot. His voice echoed in my head, as clear as if he were sitting right there in the steam-filled bathroom. Confidence isn't what you show other people, Lena. It's not about puffing out your chest and pretending you're not scared. That's just arrogance. Real confidence, it's what you prove to yourself when no one is watching. It's getting back in the boat after you've capsized. It's knowing you can survive the storm, not because you're invincible, but because you refuse to drown. Refuse to drown. The words cut through the fear. I stood up, the water sluicing off me. I I turned off the shower and looked at myself in the foggy mirror. My eyes were red, my face was blotchy. I looked like a wreck. But I wasn't drowning. Not anymore. They wanted to corner me? They wanted to threaten me? Fine. I was done playing defense. I was done with the silent war. It was time to drop the bomb. I walked out of the bathroom, dripping water on the floor, and went straight to my war room. I picked up my phone and called the reporter, Jessica Wu. "Jessica?" I said, my voice steady now, devoid of any tremor. "It's Alina Vance. The story I told you about, it's about to break. But the company is trying to bury it and pin it on me. I'm sending you everything, the full file, the bank statements, the emails, the timeline, the offshore account number, everything. They want a war? I'm going to give them Armageddon." There was a moment of silence on the other end, and then I could hear the furious clacking of her keyboard. "Alina," she said, her voice electric with adrenaline, "are you sure you want to do this? Once it's out, there's no going back." I looked at the board on my wall, at the faces of my two betrayers smiling in a stolen photograph. I thought about the life they had torched, the woman I used to be, and I thought about the woman I had become. "Jessica," I said, a slow, cold smile spreading across my face, "I am very much confident about this." I hung up the phone and hit send on the most important email of my life. An hour later, my phone buzzed with a news alert. I clicked the link, and there it was. A headline splashed across the front page of the Financial Times website, bold and undeniable. "Corporate scandal explodes. CEO and executive under investigation for multi-million-dollar embezzlement scheme." Revenge, when it finally comes, is not the hot, explosive release you imagine it to be. It's not a scream of triumph. It's a quiet, slow exhale. It's the feeling of a fever breaking in the middle of the night. It's peace. The article was a nuke. The fallout was immediate and catastrophic. The company's stock plummeted. The board went into crisis mode. The story was picked up by every major news network. Our quiet corporate drama was now a national spectacle. I watched it all unfold from my apartment, like I was watching a movie. There were live news shots from outside our office building, swarmed with reporters and satellite trucks. Then came the police. Not just a couple of detectives in a quiet car, but a full-blown raid. Teams of officers in jackets emblazoned with Financial Crimes Unit striding into the building carrying boxes. It was a slow-motion ballet of destruction. They showed Mark being escorted out of the building in handcuffs. He tried to hide his face with his jacket, but the cameras were relentless. He looked small, pathetic. His expensive suit rumpled, his face a mask of disbelief and terror. They caught Sarah trying to sneak out a back entrance. The paparazzi descended on her like wolves. The woman who had been so poised, so triumphant, was now a cornered, weeping mess, her perfect blonde hair in disarray as she was bundled into the back of an unmarked car. Their assets were frozen. Their homes were searched. Their smug, smiling faces were plastered across every screen, no longer in the society pages, but in the rogues gallery of corporate greed. Their carefully constructed world of luxury and lies didn't just crack. It was pulverized into dust, publicly and brutally. And I sat there, sipping my tea, feeling still. Not happy, not victorious, just quiet. I didn't gloat. I didn't celebrate. The rage had burned itself out, leaving behind a clean, empty space. Watching their lives collapse didn't give me joy. It gave me closure. It was the final, definitive closing of a chapter of my life that had been defined by their poison. The debt was paid, the scales were balanced. For a few weeks, I was a minor celebrity, the whistleblower, the scorned wife who got the ultimate revenge. The media wanted interviews, publishers wanted a book deal. I turned them all down. This was never about fame or money. This was about justice. My justice. But then, as the dust began to settle, I looked at the clean, empty space inside me, and I realized something profound. Destroying them wasn't enough. justice isn't just about punishment, it's about building something better in the ruins. My pain, my experience, it couldn't be for nothing. It had to mean something more than just a spectacular act of vengeance. That was the real turning point, the moment of catharsis. I took a portion of the settlement from my divorce, the money I was legally owed, the money Mark had tried so desperately to hide, and I didn't buy a new car or a fancy apartment. I started a foundation, a nonprofit dedicated to providing legal aid and career counseling for women who had been pushed out, betrayed, and silenced in the corporate world. Women like me. I called it the Phoenix Project. Rising from the ashes, the ultimate revenge is not to become your enemy. It's to become something they can never touch, something better. If you were in my shoes, would you have stopped here, content with their destruction, or would you have gone further? Let me know your thoughts. I poured all the energy I had once dedicated to revenge into building this new thing. It was harder than tearing things down, but infinitely more satisfying. I was helping people. I was creating something positive from the absolute worst experience of my life. I was finally, truly free of them. One afternoon, I got a call. A collect call from a federal prison. I almost didn't accept it, but curiosity won. It was Mark. His voice was different. The smooth, confident charm was gone, replaced by a hollow, desperate rasp. "Elena," he said, the word catching in his throat, "you did this. You ruined me. You ruined everything." I listened, my expression calm. There was no anger left, just a distant pity. "No, Mark," I said, my voice even and clear. "You did this. You and Sarah. You built a house of cards on a foundation of lies, and you were surprised when it fell. I just gave it a little push." There was a long silence, and then his voice dropped to a low, menacing whisper, the last echo of the man he used to be. "This isn't over, Elena. Do you hear me? This is not over." I smiled, a real, genuine smile. I looked around my new office, at the thank you cards from women we had helped, at the sunlight streaming through the window. "Oh, Mark," I said softly, and for the first time in years, I felt nothing but peace. "For me, it is." And I hung up the phone. People talk about confidence as if it's something you can buy or be given or inherit, a personality trait you're either born with or you're not. They're wrong. Confidence isn't given, it's forged. It's earned. It's the scar tissue that grows over your wounds stronger than the original skin. It's forged in fire, in betrayal, and in the quiet, desperate moments when you're all alone and you have to choose between collapsing and fighting. It's forged in survival. The old me, the woman with the perfect life, she was confident, but her confidence was brittle. It was built on external things, her job title, her husband's approval, her social standing. When those things were taken away, she shattered. The woman I am today, my confidence isn't built on anything that can be taken from me. It's internal. It's indestructible. Because I have faced the absolute worst, and I survived. I walked through hell and came out the other side, not unscathed, but remade. They thought they were burying me. They didn't realize I was a seed. My name is Elena Vance, and this is not a story about revenge. This is a story about confidence, the kind you can only find after you've lost everything else.